Did you know that in the United States, something like 250,000 murders have gone unsolved?
Wow, that's a staggering number.
It is, and it means that there are so many families out there who are grappling with unanswered questions. A lack of closure, a lack of justice for their loved ones.
It's hard to even fathom the pain and frustration they must endure, having to live with that uncertainty, that void.
Absolutely. And today, we're going to dive into one such case, a story that takes us back to 1985,
1985, okay.
to the streets of Hartford, Connecticut, where a young mother named Raquel Ramirez vanished, leaving behind a mystery that continues to haunt her family and a community that's desperate for answers.
You know, what strikes me about Raquel's case is that it's not just about the crime itself. It's
Oh,
a human story, a story that kind of intertwines with these larger issues like, how evidence is preserved, police conduct, and the challenges of those cold case investigations.
it's about all of those things, but at its heart, it's really about a mother, a daughter, a friend, and the enduring power of love in the face of, well, unimaginable loss.
Exactly. It's a story that resonates on so many levels.
Okay, so let's start by painting a picture of Raquel. What kind of person was she?
Well, from everything I've gathered, Raquel was a vibrant young woman. She was full of life, full of
They
energy.
had that spark.
She did, absolutely. And she was devoted to her three children, always finding ways to make birthdays and holidays special, even when times were tough.
Oh, that's sweet.
Her daughter, Brenda, remembers her as a woman who just loved to dance, who found joy in the simple
I
things.
love that.
Like, for instance, using those little cocktail umbrellas,
Right, yeah.
just to add a touch of whimsy to their celebrations.
So she was a bright spot in their lives.
She really was. The heart of her family, and her absence left a void that's never been filled.
It's heartbreaking to think about the pain her family must have gone through. So let's go back to that summer night in 1985.
Hmm.
What do we know about Raquel's movements before she disappeared?
Well, the details surrounding Raquel's last hours are still pretty shrouded in mystery, unfortunately.
Unsolved mysteries.
We know that she went out for drinks with some friends that evening,
Okay.
came home briefly after midnight,
Mm-hmm.
and then vanished again around 1:30 a.m.
So where she went, who she was with during those crucial hours, it's still unclear.
Sadly, yes. And those unanswered questions have really haunted the investigation for decades.
It's like a puzzle with some of those key pieces missing.
Exactly. And those missing pieces are often the most crucial ones.
And then, the very next day, this gruesome discovery under the I-91 overpass. Take us to that moment. What did investigators find?
Well, a group of teenagers, they were supposedly searching for fishing worms, stumbled upon Raquel's body beneath the highway overpass.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine the shock, the horror of that discovery?
That's terrible.
Initially, they assumed it was the body of a child.
Really?
Yeah, because of her petite stature. But when Detective Jacobson, who, would later go on to dedicate years of his life to this case,
Yeah.
when he arrived at the scene, he immediately noticed something was off.
What was it?
The area where Raquel's body was found was difficult to access, so it cast doubt on the teenager's story about just casually looking for bait.
That's a chilling detail.
It is, and it immediately raises questions about whether those teenagers might have known more than they were letting on.
It certainly does. So what did the initial investigation reveal about the cause of death and any potential suspects?
Okay, so the autopsy determined that Raquel had been strangled,
Oh, my goodness.
likely by hand. They found a lottery ticket near her body, a mysterious social security card. It belonged to someone else entirely. And there was also evidence of sperm, the implications of which were unclear at the time.
So many unanswered questions right from the start.
Yes. And then Raquel's boyfriend at the time, he came under scrutiny.
Of course.
There were allegations of a tumultuous relationship, whispers of domestic abuse, but that concrete evidence linking him to the murder, it was missing.
So multiple leads, but none of them leading to a clear path. It sounds like the investigation was off to a very frustrating start.
It was, definitely. Imagine being those detectives trying to piece together this puzzle with so many missing pieces, so many unknowns.
Right, and then about a month later, this chilling phone call comes in. Tell us about that tip and what it led to.
Well, a woman contacted the police,
Okay.
and she had this cryptic message. She said, "Do you want to know who killed that woman in the Connecticut River?" And then she gave them a name, Jay.
Che, pero.
She provided an address, even claimed to have details about his wife fleeing to New York.
Wow.
It seemed like a major break in the case.
It did.
But as investigators dug deeper, they found themselves facing more roadblocks than breakthroughs.
It's always something, right?
It often is in these cases, unfortunately.
What happened when they tried to track down this Jay? Did they find him?
Well, Jay, he was at a phantom. He had vanished.
Oh, no.
The address was a dead end, and his supposed wife was nowhere to be found. But just as investigators were about to dismiss the tip as maybe a cruel prank or a case of mistaken identity, a witness emerged.
Yeah.
And this witness claimed to have seen Raquel getting into a car matching the description of Jay's vehicle the night she disappeared.
So a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
Did this witness provide any additional details about Jay or what might have happened that night?
He did. He claimed to have seen Jay again later that night and described him as looking disheveled, agitated.
Yeah.
He even suggested a possible motive. A drug debt owed by one of Raquel's family members.
Oh, wow. So the investigation plunged into the underworld of drugs and violence.
It did. A very dangerous world, especially back then in Hartford.
But did this witness testimony lead to any concrete evidence against Jay?
Sadly, no. Just as investigators were starting to piece together a possible scenario, the witness, fearing for his own safety, he recanted his statement.
Ugh, another setback. So they're back at square one.
Back to square one, with even more questions than answers.
With their primary lead gone cold, did investigators shift their focus? Did they explore other possible motives or suspects?
They did. They started to notice this disturbing pattern, a series of unsolved female homicides in Connecticut during that period, many involving strangulation, and the victims are often found near highways.
So a possible serial killer.
Exactly. That chilling possibility loomed large, and it prompted the formation of a dedicated task force to investigate these interconnected cases.
So a potential shift from a personal crime to a predator operating across the state. Did the task force make any progress in connecting these cases or finding the person responsible?
Well, while the task force did solve some of the cases, they couldn't find a direct link to Raquel's murder.
Oh, man.
So the serial killer theory remained this haunting possibility, but without concrete evidence, it was just another thread in this very tangled web of unanswered questions.
It's a reminder that sometimes, even with dedicated resources and the best investigative minds, answers remain elusive.
It's true. Some cases just defy easy solutions.
But amidst these frustrating dead ends, did Raquel's family ever give up hope? Did they continue to push for answers?
They absolutely did. Raquel's family, fueled by love and determination, they never stopped fighting for justice. Years later, in the early 2000s, their persistence paid off. Renewed media attention, a reissued reward, and the unwavering dedication of Detective Jacobson, it all breathed new life into the investigation.
That's amazing. So there's still hope.
There is. And this renewed effort led to a new witness who claimed to have information about that fateful night in 1985.
Okay, this new witness, what kind of information did they bring to light? Did they know Raquel personally, or were they just someone who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time?
This new witness was the former girlfriend of a man named Paul.
Paul, okay.
Someone who had been mentioned in connection with Jay, the initial suspect who vanished. She had this disturbing memory that she'd kept buried for years, a memory that suddenly took on new significance in light of Raquel's murder.
Okay, this is getting interesting. What was this memory that Paul's ex-girlfriend had suppressed for so long? What did she remember about that night?
She recalled that on the night Raquel disappeared, Paul came home acting strangely. He had mud caked on his suit, scratches on his neck and wrist, his shirt was torn.
Oh, wow.
He claimed that he had been helping someone fix a muffler.
A likely story.
But his demeanor, his appearance, it all seemed suspicious, especially considering the rumors about his involvement in illegal activities.
Red flags everywhere. So we have a potential link to Paul, someone who might have been involved in Raquel's disappearance. And remember, he's connected to Jay, the mysterious source from the phone tip. Did this new information give Detective Jacobson any concrete leads to follow? Did he try to locate Paul?
He did. He launched a renewed effort to find both Jay and Paul, believing that they might have worked together, possibly with others, to harm Raquel. But years had passed, memories had faded, and tracking them down proved to be a challenge. Their DNA wasn't in the system, which made it difficult to connect them to any existing evidence.
It's a classic case of time being the enemy in a cold case investigation.
It's true. Witnesses disappear, evidence degrades, and the trail just grows colder with each passing year.
But even with these challenges, was Detective Jacobson able to uncover any new evidence that connected Jay and Paul to Raquel's murder, or did the case once again hit a dead end?
Just as it seemed like the investigation was gaining momentum, there was a devastating revelation. A revelation that shook the foundation of the case and the family's trust in the system that was supposed to protect them. Crucial evidence, evidence that was potentially vital to solving the crime, had been mishandled, lost, or just disappeared from the police department's custody.
This is absolutely heartbreaking. Not only was their loved one taken from them, but now they had to grapple with the knowledge that the answers they so desperately sought might have been within reach, only to be lost due to, well, negligence or incompetence. What kind of evidence are we talking about? What was missing?
Fingernail clippings, which could held DNA from her attacker, they were just gone. Items that could have held the key to identifying Raquel's attacker, they simply vanished.
Oh my God.
The mishandling of evidence was a devastating blow to the investigation, and it was a crushing reminder of the systemic failings that often plague these kinds of cases.
It's a tragedy, and it's made even worse by the fact that it was compounded by another devastating blow to the Hartford Police Department during that period.
The Marrero scandal. Remind us about that scandal and how it might have impacted Raquel's case.
Oh, right. One of the original detectives involved in Raquel's case, a man named Marrero, he was charged with multiple counts of sexual assault. It shook public trust in the police force to its core.
Yeah.
This scandal cast a dark cloud over the entire department, and it left Raquel's family wondering if corruption or misconduct might have played a role in their mother's case going unsolved. So a case already riddled with challenges now faced this added burden of potential corruption within the very institution tasked with finding the truth. Did Detective Jacobson address these concerns? Did he believe that Marrero's actions might have impacted Raquel's case?
While Jacobson maintained that Moreau's actions didn't directly impact Raquel's case file, the damage to public trust was undeniable.
Right.
It raised these questions about whether evidence might have been tampered with, leads intentionally ignored, or witnesses intimidated.
It's a chilling thought, the possibility that the pursuit of justice might have been compromised by those sworn to uphold it. But despite these setbacks, these layers of doubt and uncertainty, Detective Jacobson never gave up. What steps did he take to salvage the investigation and try to find answers, despite the lost evidence and the cloud of suspicion?
Jacobson, a man of unwavering dedication, he focused on what evidence remained, however limited it might have been.
Right.
He tracked down the woman whose social security card was found in Raquel's pocket.
Hoping for a connection.
Hoping for a connection, but it led nowhere. He pushed for new DNA testing on the remaining evidence, particularly the sperm sample, but there was no match in the national database at the time.
So another series of dead ends. But even if they had found a DNA match, how would they know for sure if it belonged to the killer?
That's the thing about DNA evidence. While it can be a powerful tool, it's not always a silver bullet.
Right.
It needs to be interpreted within the context of the case, corroborated by other evidence, and examined with a keen understanding of the complexities of human relationships.
So where did this leave the investigation? What was Detective Jacobson's working theory about what might have happened to Raquel?
Despite the lack of a DNA match and all of the setbacks, Detective Jacobson remained convinced that Raquel's murder was not a random act of violence.
He believed she was targeted.
He did, likely because of her family members' involvement in the drug trade. And he suspected Jay and Paul were involved, possibly with others. But without hard evidence connecting them to the crime, and with their whereabouts unknown, and with the shadow of corruption hanging over the investigation, the path to justice seemed increasingly uncertain.
It's a story that highlights the immense challenges of cold case investigations, the impact of lost evidence, and the enduring pain of unanswered questions. But amidst these complexities, there's a glimmer of hope.
A glimmer of hope.
The unwavering dedication of a detective determined to find the truth, the resilience of a family refusing to let go of their loved one's memory, and the potential for new technology to unlock secrets that have been hidden for decades.
That's what keeps us going, the belief that even in the coldest of cases, there's always a chance for the truth to emerge.
We'll delve further into those aspects of the case and explore the broader implications of unsolved murders and their impact on families and communities in Part 2 of our deep dive into the case of Raquel Ramirez.
Yes, and we'll unravel that mystery of the Social Security card. It may have initially seemed like a dead end, but it actually led Detective Jacobson down this winding path, uncovering unexpected connections and potential truths that might have otherwise remained buried with the past.
Sounds intriguing. I can't wait to hear more. We left off on that devastating revelation about the evidence. Crucial evidence in Raquel's case. Just gone.
I know. It's hard to even imagine the pain and frustration her family must felt.
Yeah. Not only dealing with loss of their loved one, but also the realization that the system that was supposed to protect them had failed so completely.
Absolutely. It really shakes your faith in the whole system. You start to question everything.
And it wasn't just, a few minor details that went missing, right? We're talking about potentially crucial evidence. The kind of stuff that could have identified Raquel's killer.
Oh, absolutely. Things like those fingernail clippings, they could have contained DNA from her attacker.
And those are gone.
Gone. Vanished. In 1985, DNA technology was just emerging. But even then, those clippings could have been crucial if they'd been preserved properly.
Right, right.
But today, with all the advancements in DNA analysis, we could potentially extract a full profile from even a tiny sample.
So it's not just about the investigative mistakes that happened back then. It's about how those mistakes continue to impact the search for answers even today.
Exactly. It's like this ripple effect that just keeps going and going.
And then, as if the lost evidence wasn't bad enough, there's the whole Marrero scandal. It's just mind-boggling to think that one of the detectives involved in Raquel's case was later convicted of such horrible crimes.
Yeah. The Marrero scandal, it really sent shockwaves through the whole community and the police department.
I bet.
I mean, here you have a detective, someone who's supposed to be upholding the law, actually preying on vulnerable women. It just casts such a dark shadow over everything he touched.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, did he target Raquel? Or did his actions, his abuse of power, create this culture of impunity within the department? A culture where evidence was mishandled and cases like Raquel's were allowed to just slip through the cracks.
It's impossible to say for sure, but the questions definitely linger. Even if Marrero wasn't directly involved in Raquel's case, his actions really damaged the trust between the police and the community.
And that makes everything so much harder.
It does. It makes it harder for people to come forward with information. They might be afraid they won't be believed, or even worse, that they'll become targets themselves.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
But even with all of that, all those immense challenges, Detective Jacobson never gave up. He kept chasing down every lead, every shred of evidence, even when it seemed like the case was, hopelessly cold.
Jacobson's dedication to this case, it's really remarkable. He knew that for Raquel's family, finding answers, even after all these years, was crucial.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about closing a case file, it was about offering them some kind of peace, some kind of closure.
So let's talk about that Social Security card. The one that belonged to someone way too young to have known Raquel.
Ah, yes, the Social Security card.
It seemed like a dead end, a random piece of evidence with no connection to the case. But I have a feeling it might be more important than we initially thought.
You have a good feeling there. Remember how we talked about those little details, those seemingly insignificant things that can sometimes hold the key to unlocking the truth?
I do, yeah.
Well, that Social Security card, the one everyone dismissed as just a weird little anomaly, it actually becomes a crucial turning point in the investigation.
Really?
It's a reminder that in these cold cases, you can't afford to overlook anything. Every piece of the puzzle, no matter how small or irrelevant it might seem, could be important.
So how did Detective Jacobson turn this random piece of evidence into a viable lead? What was his thinking?
Well, he started with the basics. Who was this person? Where did they live? Was there any connection, however remote, to Raquel?
Makes sense.
And remember, back in 1985, there wasn't the instant access to information that we have today. Tracking down this person, even just to confirm their identity, took a lot of legwork.
Old school detective work.
Exactly.
So what did he uncover about the person connected to that Social Security card? Did they know Raquel? Did they live in Hartford?
Well, when Jacobson finally got the information, he discovered that the person on that card lived hundreds of miles away in Chicago, and they would have been just a toddler in 1985.
So no connection to Raquel.
Not a direct one, no. But Jacobson, being the tenacious investigator he is, didn't give up. He dug deeper. He started looking into the family history of the cardholder, their extended relatives, anyone who might have had a link, even a very distant one, to Hartford.
Casting a wide net, hoping to catch something, anything.
Exactly. And he found something. It turned out that the cardholder's family had a distant relative, let's call him Michael, who had lived in Hartford for a short time in the early 1980s. Now, Michael himself had no known connection to Raquel, but he worked as a mechanic in a small garage not far from where her body was found.
Interesting. So there's a geographic connection, even if there wasn't a direct personal link.
Right. And Jacobson, with his years of experience, he knew that sometimes the most valuable information comes from the most unexpected sources.
So he decided to track down Michael, right? Hoping to learn more about his time in Hartfood.
He did. But as fate would have it, Michael had passed away a few years earlier.
It's another dead end.
It seemed that way. But Jacobson wasn't ready to give up on this lead just yet.
Of course not. What did he do?
He decided to try and track down Michael's widow, hoping that she might have some of his old belongings, photos, letters, anything that could shed some light on his time in Hartford.
It was a long shot.
It was, but in cold cases, you have to follow every thread, no matter how thin.
Did it lead to anything?
It did. She had kept a lot of Michael's things, including boxes of old letters and photos. And as Jacobson carefully went through them, he found something remarkable.
What was it?
A letter from a friend of Michael's. A casual correspondence, just two old friends catching up. But it contained a detail that gave Jacobson chills.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What was the detail?
In that letter, Michael's friend mentioned a guy named Paul.
No way. The same Paul from the phone tip?
The one and only. The same Paul whose ex-girlfriend had those disturbing memories.
Wow, what are the chances?
Hmm.
So now we have a connection between Paul and Michael, the mechanic, with the distant relative who had that Social Security card. But how does that connect to Raquel?
The letter itself didn't mention Raquel directly, but it painted a very unsettling picture of Paul.
What do you mean?
Michael's friend described him as someone who was always in trouble, someone who was involved in shady dealings, someone who bragged about knowing how to make people disappear.
That's really creepy.
It is. It's not concrete evidence, but it definitely raises some serious red flags about Paul.
Did Michael's widow have any other information about Paul? Did her husband ever mention him?
She did. She said that Michael had mentioned Paul a few times.
Yeah.
Described him as bad news, someone you don't want to mess with.
Not someone you want to be around.
No, definitely not. She even said that Paul used to come to the garage late at night, sometimes with some other unsavory characters, usually needing some quick repairs, always paying in cash. It was clear that Michael, even with his limited interactions with Paul, sensed that he was involved in something dangerous.
So we have corroboration from multiple sources painting Paul as someone involved in criminal activity, someone capable of violence, and someone who knew Michael, the mechanic, with a link to that Social Security card. It's all circumstantial, but it's starting to point to Paul.
And remember, all of this stemmed from that seemingly insignificant detail, the Social Security card. It just goes to show you really can't overlook anything in these cases.
It's amazing how that one little detail led Detective Jacobson down this winding path, uncovering all these connections and potential truths that might have stayed hidden forever.
It is. It's like a domino effect.
So what's next? Where does Detective Jacobson go from here?
Well, he goes back to those old witness statements. He re-interviews anyone who might have had contact with Paul or Michael, looking for any additional details, anything that could corroborate what he already knows.
So he's essentially rebuilding the case from the ground up, using this new information as a foundation.
Exactly. It's painstaking, but it's absolutely necessary.
What about those advancements in DNA technology we talked about earlier? Could those play a role?
Oh, absolutely. He's looking into that too, using those new techniques to re-examine the existing evidence. Even though there wasn't a match in the national database back then, new technologies might be able to extract more information from the samples or even identify potential familial links.
It's incredible how far forensic science has come. It gives you hope that even those cold cases that seemed impossible to solve might have a chance.
It does. Technology combined with dedicated investigators, that's a powerful combination.
It is. But while we wait for those developments, there's something we can all do, right? We can remember Raquel, keep her story alive, talk about the challenges of cold cases and the impact they have on families.
You're absolutely right. We can't let cases like Raquel's just fade away. We owe it to the victims and their families to keep fighting for justice, to keep searching for answers, and to never give up hope.
So for our listeners out there, if you have any information about Raquel's case or any other unsolved murder, please come forward. You never know. Even the smallest detail could be the key to cracking a case wide open.
Even a seemingly insignificant memory could be the missing piece of the puzzle. Don't underestimate the power of a single detail.
Now let's take a step back and talk about this broader issue of cold cases. What can be done to improve their resolution rates? What are some of the things that hold these investigations back?
Well, you see, cold cases often face this kind of perfect storm of challenges. First, there's the issue of time. As years, even decades go by, witnesses move, memories fade, evidence degrades. It becomes really difficult to piece things together.
Right. And then I imagine resources are a problem.
Absolutely. Cold case units are often understaffed and underfunded. They're struggling to keep up with the sheer volume of cases.
It makes sense, with limited resources, it's hard to prioritize cases that are decades old, especially when new crimes are happening all the time.
It's a difficult balance, but we need to find a way to give these cold cases a fighting chance.
So what can we do? How can we improve the system?
Well, for one thing, we need to increase funding for those cold case units, give them the resources they need to hire more investigators, invest in new technology, and dedicate the necessary time to these complex investigations.
Yeah, that makes sense. More resources, more manpower.
Exactly. Another crucial area is evidence preservation. We've seen in Raquel's case how devastating the loss or mishandling of evidence can be.
Oh, absolutely.
We need standardized protocols, proper training, and secure storage facilities.
So protecting that evidence from the very beginning is crucial.
It's fundamental. Because if evidence is lost or compromised, it's like losing a piece of the puzzle. It makes it that much harder to reconstruct what happened and find the truth.
But beyond the resources and the evidence, what about the human element? How can we encourage people to come forward with information, especially in cases where there might be fear or distrust of law enforcement?
That's a really important point. We need to build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve.
Right.
People need to feel safe coming forward, knowing that they'll be taken seriously and protected if necessary.
And how do we do that?
Well, community outreach programs are a good start, so are witness protection services. And, of course, a transparent and accountable justice system is absolutely vital.
So it's not just about solving crimes, it's about creating an environment where people feel safe and empowered to come forward with information.
Exactly. And that takes time, effort, and a real commitment to building those bridges.
And speaking of building bridges, what about the role of technology? We hear so much about advancements in DNA analysis and forensic science. How are those impacting cold case investigations?
Technology is a game changer in cold cases, I have to say.
In a good way.
Oh, definitely. Advances in DNA testing, especially things like familial DNA searching, are allowing investigators to connect even those really degraded samples to potential relatives of suspects. It's leading to breakthroughs in cases that were once considered unsolvable.
That's amazing.
It is. And things like facial recognition software, digital forensics, and social media analysis, those are becoming increasingly powerful tools, too.
It's exciting to think about all the possibilities those new technologies hold. It gives hope to families who've been waiting so long for answers.
It does. But it's important to remember it's not just about the technology. It's about the dedication of investigators like Detective Jacobson, the resilience of families like Raquel's, and the willingness of communities to come together and demand justice.
So, as we move forward with Raquel's story, let's keep her family in our thoughts. Let's honor their strength and their unwavering pursuit of justice. And let's remember that this isn't just about solving a crime. It's about restoring faith in the justice system, honoring the memory of a life cut short, and ensuring that no family ever has to endure this pain alone. So we left off with this possible connection between Paul and Michael, the mechanic. Did Detective Jacobson find anything that directly linked Paul to Raquel?
Well, remember, Michael was already dead, so there was no chance to question him directly.
Right.
But Jacobson decided to really dig into Michael's life, hoping to find something, anything that might connect back to Raquel. He went back to that garage where Michael had worked, talking to his old coworkers, going over old records, trying to find any mention of Paul or anyone who matched his description.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
It really was.
But did those efforts pay off? Did he find anything to support the information from that letter and Michael's widow?
He did. Actually, several of Michael's former coworkers remembered Paul. They said he was a real smooth talker. They said he'd often come to the garage late at night, usually with a couple other guys who looked a bit rough, They said Paul would always pay in cash.
Cash, huh?
Yeah, requesting those kind of like discreet repairs or parts that were hard to come by, and always acting like he was in a hurry.
It sounds like he was up to no good.
It definitely fits the profile.
But was there anything that, directly linked Paul to Raquel?
One of Michael's coworkers, he mentioned something interesting.
Okay.
He said he saw Paul at the garage a few days after Raquel's body was found. Said Paul seemed agitated, really nervous, kept asking about the police investigation.
Well,
yeah, wanting to know if they had any leads or suspects.
that's pretty suspicious. Sounds like he was worried, like he had something to hide.
It does, doesn't it? Now, they couldn't remember any specifics about his appearance. If he had scratches or torn clothing like his ex-girlfriend mentioned. But they did say Paul was driving a different car that night, an older sedan. Said he'd borrowed it from a friend.
Interesting. It seems like a small detail, but I'm guessing it turns out to be important.
You're right. It was a small detail, but it ended up being crucial. Jacobson, he'd been going over all the old witness statements from the initial investigation.
Trying to see if anything had been missed.
Exactly, trying to find anything that might have seemed irrelevant at the time but could be important now. And he came across a statement from a woman who lived near that bar where Raquel was last seen.
What'd you say?
She hadn't seen Raquel, but she remembered seeing a car matching the description of the one Paul had borrowed, parked near the bar around the time Raquel disappeared. She'd even written down the license plate number because she thought the car looked suspicious, like it didn't belong in the neighborhood.
Wow. So a concerned citizen and a detail-oriented detective, what a combination.
Right. It's amazing how those things can come together.
So did they track down the car?
They did. Turned out it belonged to a woman in a nearby town. She admitted she loaned it to Paul, said he was a friend of a friend, just doing him a favor while his car was being repaired.
So now there's a connection between Paul and the place where Raquel was last seen.
Exactly. His behavior after the murder was suspicious. He had ties to Michael, and now this. Things were definitely starting to add up.
It was enough to arrest him.
Right? Well, not quite. Jacobson knew he needed more, something that directly linked Paul to the crime scene. But this new information, it gave him enough to get a search warrant for Paul's home and any vehicles associated with him.
So they searched his place. What did they find?
They didn't find any DNA evidence or a murder weapon or anything like that, but they found something that was really incriminating.
What?
A whole bunch of newspaper clippings.
Clippings.
Yeah, about Raquel's case and a bunch of other unsolved murders from that same time period, all neatly organized, tucked away in a folder in his closet.
Oh, that's just creepy.
It was. I mean, people follow true crime cases. That's not unusual. But to have a whole collection like that about a case that you might be involved in, that's something else entirely.
So the clippings, the suspicious behavior, the connection to Michael, was it enough to finally arrest Paul?
It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was definitely damning. It showed an obsession, a level of awareness that went way beyond just casual interests. Combined with everything else they knew, it made him the prime suspect.
Okay, so where does that leave us? Is Paul behind bars?
Sadly, no. He disappeared shortly after those searches.
He got away.
He did. Some people think he fled the country, others think he's hiding somewhere, waiting for things to blow over.
It's so frustrating. Even when you identify a suspect, they can still slip away. It makes you wonder if Raquel's family will ever get the justice they deserve.
It's a hard truth, but it happens more often than you'd think. But even though he hasn't been caught, that new information, it did bring some peace to Raquel's family.
How so?
It validated their suspicions. Knowing that the investigators had zeroed in on a suspect, someone they believed was responsible all along, it gave them some comfort.
It shows the importance of never giving up hope, even in the darkest of times.
It does. Raquel's case, even though it's still open, it's a reminder that even after all these years, the truth can still come to light. Thanks to advancements in technology, the dedication of people like Detective Jacobson, and the unwavering love of a family that refused to let go.
It's a powerful reminder that every life matters, that every case deserves attention, and that the pursuit of justice should never be abandoned.
I couldn't agree more, and hopefully someday Raquel's family will finally get the answers they've been seeking for so long.
That's our hope, too. Well, this has been a fascinating and heartbreaking look into a truly complex case.
It has. Raquel's story is a reminder of the human cost of unsolved crimes. It's about the families who are left behind, the unanswered questions, and the long shadow that these cases cast over communities.
And for our listeners, if you have any information about Raquel's case or any other unsolved crime, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, please come forward. Your tip could be the one that makes all the difference.
That's right. You never know what piece of information could be the missing link. Don't hesitate to reach out to the authorities.
And remember, every tip, every lead brings us one step closer to justice. Well, that's it for our deep dive into the case of Raquel Ramirez. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new topic that will hopefully spark your curiosity and get you thinking. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop seeking the truth.
And if you haven't already, please subscribe to The Deep Dive for more captivating stories and thought-provoking discussions. We appreciate your support.